Would you help a hungry grandmother if Jesus asked you to? Imagine you're walking home one evening. The sun is beginning to disappear behind the buildings. People are heading home. Cars are passing by. Families are preparing dinner. Children are playing outside. Everything around you seems normal. But as you continue walking, you notice an elderly grandmother sitting alone outside a small house. She isn't asking anyone for money. She isn't calling people over. She's simply sitting quietly. Her hands are resting in her lap. Her face looks tired. And beside her is a small bag containing almost nothing. You look toward the house. Through the window, you can see a small kitchen. There is hardly any food inside. The refrigerator is nearly empty. There is no proper meal waiting for her tonight. She has been trying to make what she has last as long as possible. But now, there is almost nothing left. You stand there for a moment. You could keep walking. You could tell yourself that someone else will notice. You could think, I have my own responsibilities. You could even say, I wish I could help, but I don't have enough. And then, imagine Jesus standing beside you. He looks toward that grandmother. Then he turns toward you. And with love in his eyes, he asks, My child, would you help her? What would you do? Would you keep walking? Would you look away? Would you wait for somebody else? Or would you stop? Would you say, Lord, if you have placed her in front of me, show me what I can do? Think about that question, because sometimes we imagine that serving God must involve something enormous. We think we need thousands of people watching. We think we need a large ministry. We think we need money, influence, or recognition. But what if serving God sometimes begins with something much simpler? A meal, a bag of groceries, a glass of water, a visit, a phone call, a few minutes of conversation, a helping hand, a person who simply refuses to walk away. Sometimes, the greatest expression of love is simply noticing someone who needs it. And there are people all around us whom the world doesn't notice. The elderly person living alone, the widow trying to survive, the father who doesn't know how he will provide dinner, the mother quietly struggling, the child going to bed hungry, the homeless person sleeping outside, the stranger who smiles during the day while crying inside. People may not see them, but God sees them. God knows their names. God knows their stories. God knows their struggles. God knows every prayer they have whispered. And God can use ordinary people to bring extraordinary encouragement into their lives. God notices the people we overlook. Before we continue with this grandmother's story, there is something important we need to understand. God has never measured a person's value by their possessions. The world often does. The world looks at houses, cars, clothing, money, popularity, education, followers, success. But God looks at the heart. A person who owns very little is not worth less in God's eyes. An elderly grandmother sitting alone is not invisible to heaven. A person who has nothing to offer you can still be precious to God. And sometimes, God allows us to encounter people who need help because He wants to teach us something about compassion. Think about the way Jesus lived. He didn't spend His time only with powerful people. He noticed those who were hurting. He stopped for people. He listened to people. He touched people. He fed people. He comforted people. He gave hope to people. And He constantly challenged His followers to look beyond themselves. That's important, because it's easy to love people when loving them benefits us. It's easy to help when everyone is watching. It's easy to give when we know someone will thank us. But what about when nobody sees? What about when nobody applauds? What about when the person cannot repay you? What about when helping requires sacrifice? That is where compassion becomes real. Imagine that grandmother again. She cannot offer you anything in return. She may not even have the strength to properly thank you. But does that mean she is not worth helping? Of course not. Her value does not come from what she can give you. Her value comes from the fact that she is a human being created and loved by God. And perhaps that's the lesson Jesus wants us to remember. The widow who had very little. There is a powerful story in the Bible about a widow who had almost nothing. Jesus was watching people bring their offerings. Some people gave large amounts. Others gave what seemed impressive. Then a poor widow came forward. She placed 2 small coins into the offering. To the eyes of the crowd, probably looked insignificant. 2 tiny coins. What could that possibly accomplish? But Jesus saw something everyone else could have missed. He knew that those coins represented sacrifice. She didn't give from abundance. She gave from what she had. And Jesus used her example to teach his disciples something profound. God does not look at generosity exactly the way people do. People often ask, "How much did you give?" But God also sees the heart behind the giving. He sees sacrifice. He sees intention. He sees love. That matters when we think about the hungry grandmother. Maybe you cannot buy everything she needs. Maybe you don't have enough money to fill her entire kitchen. But perhaps you can buy a loaf of bread. Perhaps you can buy milk. Perhaps you can bring rice. Perhaps you can bring vegetables. Perhaps you can prepare one meal. You might think, it's too little. But never underestimate a small act done with genuine love. The widow's offering looked small to people, but Jesus noticed it. And your act of kindness may look small to the world, while being enormous to the person receiving it. Ruth. When kindness becomes a way of life. Now think about Ruth. Ruth experienced loss. She experienced uncertainty. She didn't know exactly what the future would look like. Yet she stayed beside Naomi. She chose loyalty when leaving would have been easier. And eventually, Ruth went into the fields to gather grain. She was doing humble work. She wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't surrounded by crowds. She was simply doing what she could. And through the events that followed, God worked through her faithfulness. Her story became part of something much greater than she could have imagined. Think about that. Ruth couldn't see the entire story while she was living it. She couldn't see everything God was preparing. She only knew what she needed to do that day. And sometimes that's how our lives work too. God doesn't always show us the entire picture. He may simply place one person in front of us, one opportunity, one need, one decision, and he asks us to be faithful with that moment. Maybe you can't solve every problem in your community. Maybe you can't feed every hungry person. Maybe you can't care for every elderly person. But perhaps you can help one. And perhaps being faithful with one opportunity is exactly what God is asking from you. The story of Elijah and the widow. There is another story that teaches us something powerful. During a difficult time, the prophet Elijah encountered a widow who was struggling. She had very little food. Her situation was desperate. She was preparing what she believed might be one of her final meals. She had almost nothing left. Yet God was working even in that difficult situation. The story reminds us that God sees people in seasons of scarcity. He sees the person whose cupboard is empty. He sees the family wondering where tomorrow's meal will come from. He sees the elderly woman counting the last few pieces of food in her kitchen. And he is not indifferent to their suffering. That should change the way we see people. When we encounter someone who is hungry, we shouldn't immediately judge them. We shouldn't assume they are lazy. We shouldn't assume they don't care. We don't know their story. We don't know what they have experienced. We don't know how many times they have struggled. We don't know what they have prayed about. Sometimes compassion begins when judgment ends. Instead of asking, "Why doesn't this person have more?" perhaps we should ask, "What can I do to help?" When Jesus saw the hungry, during his ministry, Jesus repeatedly encountered crowds of hungry people. They had followed him. They had listened to him. They had spent hours with him. Eventually, the disciples became concerned. There wasn't enough food. From a human perspective, the situation looked impossible. There were thousands of people. There was very little food. The disciples could see the problem. But Jesus saw the possibility. A small amount of food was brought forward. It didn't look like enough. Yet Jesus took what was available and used it to feed the multitude. That story teaches us something important. Sometimes we focus so much on what we don't have that we forget to ask God what he can do with what we do have. Maybe you don't have a large amount of money. Maybe you don't have a big house. Maybe you don't have extra resources, but you may have something. You may have food. You may have time. You may have clothing. You may have transportation. You may have strength. You may have a listening ear. You may have the ability to encourage someone. And perhaps God isn't asking you to give what you don't possess. Perhaps He is asking you to surrender what you already have. The Good Samaritan, the person who stopped. Jesus once told a story about a man who was attacked while traveling. He was beaten. He was wounded. He was left on the road. People saw him, but they didn't stop. They continued on their way. Then another man came. He saw the wounded stranger, and something was different. He didn't ignore him. He didn't make excuses. He didn't say, "This isn't my responsibility." He stopped. He went closer. He cared for the man's wounds. He helped him. He took him somewhere safe. And he paid for his continued care. Jesus used this story to teach about loving our neighbor. And the lesson is still powerful today. Sometimes our neighbor isn't someone we know. Sometimes our neighbor is the person God places directly in front of us. The elderly woman, the hungry child, the struggling father, the lonely man, the homeless stranger, the person who needs encouragement, the person who has nobody else. And perhaps the question isn't whether they deserve our help. Perhaps the question is whether we are willing to show mercy. What if the grandmother is waiting for someone? Now return to the grandmother. Imagine that she has been sitting there for hours. Maybe she has been hoping someone will come. Maybe she has prayed, "God, please provide." Maybe she has wondered whether anyone remembers her. And then, you arrive. You might think you're simply bringing groceries. But she may see something much deeper. She may see an answer to prayer. She may see evidence that someone cares. She may feel hope again. You don't have to tell her, "God sent me." You can simply love her. You can let your actions speak. You can knock on her door. You can smile. You can say, "I brought something for you." And maybe those few words will change her entire day. Perhaps even more than the food. She needed to know that somebody noticed. Sometimes people need more than food. Helping someone who is hungry isn't always only about food. Sometimes hunger is physical. Sometimes loneliness is emotional. Sometimes people are starving for encouragement. Some elderly people have food in their homes, but nobody visits them. Some people have enough money, but feel completely alone. Some people have houses, but have nobody to talk to. Some people smile in public, while feeling broken inside. That's why compassion has many forms. You can feed someone. You can listen to someone. You can pray with someone. You can encourage someone. You can forgive someone. You can visit someone. You can remind someone that God has not forgotten them. Never assume your kindness has to be expensive. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give is your time. Sit with someone. Listen. Ask how they're doing. Let them speak. Don't rush away. The world is full of people who are surrounded by others, yet still feel alone. A few minutes of genuine attention can mean more than we realize. What God sees when nobody else is watching. There are acts of kindness that will never become public. Nobody will record them. Nobody will post them. Nobody will give you an award. Nobody may even know you did them. But God knows. You don't need an audience to obey God. You don't need applause to show love. You don't need recognition to be generous. Some of the most beautiful acts of faith happen quietly. A mother preparing food for someone who has none. A young person buying groceries for an elderly neighbor. A stranger paying for someone's meal. A person visiting someone who has been forgotten. A Christian praying with someone who is hurting. No cameras. No applause. No followers. Just love. Just obedience. Just compassion. And God sees it. What if you don't have much? Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, "I would love to help, but I don't have much myself." Then remember this. God does not ask you to give what you don't have. Don't compare your resources with someone else's. Don't say, "If I can't do something huge, I won't do anything." That's a dangerous way to think. Small acts matter. If you have one meal, you can share part of it. If you have a little money, You can use some of it wisely. If you have clothes you no longer need, you can give them. If you have time, you can visit someone. If you have a phone, you can call someone who feels alone. If you have faith, you can pray. If you have hope, you can share it. You may not be able to solve everything, but you can do something. And sometimes something is exactly what someone needs. The danger of waiting for the perfect moment. One reason people don't help is because they keep waiting. They say, "One day I'll have enough money. One day I'll have more time. One day I'll be in a better position. One day I'll do something meaningful." But what if the opportunity God has given you is today? The person in front of you may need help now. The grandmother may be hungry tonight. The child may need food today. The lonely person may need someone today. Don't always wait for a perfect opportunity. Sometimes obedience looks like responding to the imperfect opportunity right in front of you. You don't have to know exactly what will happen. You simply have to take the next right step. Jesus taught us to love in practical ways. Jesus didn't describe love as merely an emotion. He demonstrated it. When people were hungry, he cared. When people were sick, he cared. When people were grieving, he cared. When people were rejected, he cared. When people were afraid, he cared. When people were overlooked, he cared. His compassion was visible. And as followers of Christ, we are called to reflect that compassion. Not perfectly, not because we're trying to earn God's love, but because God's love changes our hearts. When you understand how much God has forgiven you, you become more willing to forgive. When you understand God's mercy toward you, you become more willing to show mercy. When you understand God's generosity, you become more willing to give. And when you understand that God sees you, you become more willing to see others. Imagine the grandmother's reaction. Let's go back to that moment. You decide not to walk away. You go to a store. You purchase food, bread, milk, rice, vegetables, fruit, maybe some things she enjoys. You carry the bags back to her home. You knock on the door. She opens it. She looks surprised. You smile. You hand her the groceries. For a moment, she doesn't know what to say. Maybe she begins to cry. Maybe she tells you that she didn't know what she was going to eat that night. Maybe she tells you she had been praying. Maybe she simply says, "Thank you." And then you realize something. The groceries weren't only groceries. They were a message. You are not forgotten. Someone sees you. Your life matters. God still cares about you. And perhaps that's what Christian kindness should communicate. Not pride, not superiority, not, "Look what I did for you," but humility, love, mercy, compassion. What if you could see the future? Now imagine something else. What if you could see what happens to that grandmother after you help her? What if you could see how that meal gives her strength? What if the encouragement you give her helps her through a difficult season? What if she later tells someone about the kindness she received? What if that person then decides to help someone else? What if your small action becomes part of a chain of compassion? You may never see the full result. That's okay. Seeds don't become trees instantly. Sometimes we plant something today, and someone else sees the fruit tomorrow. The same is true with kindness. You may speak one encouraging sentence to someone, and years later they still remember it. You may help someone during their darkest moment, and they never forget you. You may pray for someone, and never know what God eventually does. That's why we shouldn't measure the value of kindness only by immediate results. Faithfulness matters. God can use ordinary people. You don't have to be a famous preacher. You don't have to own a large organization. You don't have to stand in front of thousands. God can use ordinary people. He used fishermen. He used farmers. He used widows. He used servants. He used people whose names are barely remembered. He used people who simply obeyed. And he can use you too. Maybe your ministry isn't standing on a stage. Maybe your ministry is sitting beside an elderly person. Maybe your ministry is feeding someone. Maybe your ministry is helping a struggling family. Maybe your ministry is encouraging someone who feels hopeless. Maybe your ministry is being kind when everyone else is being cruel. Never underestimate what God can do through an ordinary person with a willing heart. When you feel too busy, sometimes we don't help because we're cruel. Sometimes we simply don't notice. We're busy. We're thinking about work, bills, family, responsibilities, our own problems, our own future, and while we're focused on everything ahead, we can miss the person standing beside us. That's why we sometimes need to slow down, look around, ask God, Lord, is there someone you want me to notice? Maybe the answer will be someone you didn't expect. Maybe it's the elderly neighbor. Maybe it's the single mother. Maybe it's the struggling student. Maybe it's the person sitting alone. Maybe it's someone in your own family. Don't be so focused on where you're going that you miss the person God has placed beside you. You don't have to save everyone. There is another important lesson. You cannot solve every problem in the world. You cannot feed every hungry person. You cannot help every family. You cannot fix every broken situation. And that's okay. Jesus is the Savior. You are not. Your responsibility isn't to carry the entire world on your shoulders. Your responsibility is to be faithful with what God places within your reach. One person, one moment, one opportunity, one act of love. If God puts someone in front of you, ask what you can do. Do what you can. Then trust God with what you cannot. What kind of person are we becoming? Helping others doesn't only affect them, changes us. Every time you choose compassion over indifference, your heart becomes more compassionate. Every time you choose generosity over selfishness, your heart becomes more generous. Every time you choose forgiveness over bitterness, your heart becomes freer. Every time you choose to stop and help, you become more aware of the people around you. That's one reason God calls us to love others. Because love changes the person who gives it as well as the person who receives it. Perhaps God is not only trying to help that grandmother through you. Perhaps He is also teaching you how to become more like Christ. When God gives you an opportunity, maybe you've prayed, God, use my life. That's a beautiful prayer. But sometimes we imagine God's answer will be dramatic. Maybe we expect a miracle. Maybe we expect a dream. Maybe we expect a huge assignment. But sometimes God's answer is very ordinary. Someone needs help. Someone needs food. Someone needs forgiveness. Someone needs encouragement. Someone needs prayer. Someone needs a friend. And God whispers into your heart, go. Maybe that's the opportunity you've been praying for. Maybe the grandmother isn't a distraction from your purpose. Maybe she is part of it. The person you help may never repay you. One of the hardest lessons about genuine kindness is accepting that sometimes there is no repayment. The person may never have anything to give you. They may never be able to return the favor. They may not even remember your name. But that's okay. Christian love isn't supposed to be a business transaction. You don't help someone because you're expecting something back. You help because love gives. You help because mercy gives. You help because Jesus taught us to love our neighbors. And ultimately, you help because God has been merciful to you. Don't let fear stop your kindness. Maybe you're afraid that your help won't be enough. Maybe you're afraid people will judge you. Maybe you're afraid someone will reject your offer. Maybe you're afraid you don't know what to say. But don't let fear prevent you from trying. You can start simply. Can I help you? Do you need something to eat? Can I pray with you? Are you okay? Sometimes a simple question opens a door. And once the door opens, love can enter. What if Jesus were standing beside you? Now imagine something. What if Jesus were physically standing beside you as you walked through your neighborhood? What if He pointed toward the grandmother? What if He pointed toward the hungry child? What if He pointed toward the lonely man? What if He pointed toward the struggling family? And then He looked at you. Would you notice? Would you stop? Would you help? Would you say, Lord, someone else will do it? Or would you say, Lord, I am willing? We may not physically see Jesus standing beside us, but His teachings are clear. He calls us to love. He calls us to mercy. He calls us to compassion. He calls us to care for people. And every day, we have opportunities to practice that love. The grandmother may be closer than you think. Perhaps the grandmother in the story isn't someone far away. Maybe there is someone like her near you. Maybe she lives down your street. Maybe she lives in your neighborhood. Maybe she is a relative. Maybe she sits alone at church. Maybe she has stopped asking for help because she doesn't want to be a burden. Maybe she smiles every time she sees you, while secretly struggling. You may never know unless you ask. Sometimes the people who need help are not the ones shouting the loudest. Some people suffer quietly. That's why we need eyes that notice, ears that listen, and hearts that care. A small meal can carry a big message. Never think that a meal is just a meal. Food can communicate love. When someone is hungry, giving them food says, "I care about your well-being." When someone is lonely, sitting beside them says, "You don't have to face this moment alone." When someone is discouraged, encouraging them says, "Don't give up." When someone feels forgotten, remembering them says, "You still matter." These things may seem simple, but simple acts can carry deep meaning. What will God remember? One day, our lives will not be measured by the number of possessions we collected. The cars will stay behind. The houses will stay behind. The money will stay behind. The popularity will disappear. The applause will fade. What matters is what kind of people we became. Did we love? Did we show mercy? Did we forgive? Did we care? Did we help? Did we use what God gave us to bless others? That's something worth thinking about, because we can spend our entire lives chasing things and still miss the people God placed around us. Don't let that happen. If you have been blessed, remember others. If you have food, remember those who are hungry. If you have a home, remember those who have nowhere to sleep. If you have family, remember those who are alone. If you have strength, remember those who are weak. If you have money, remember those who have very little. If you have knowledge, help someone who is trying to learn. If you have hope, share it with someone who is losing theirs. If God has given you something, don't forget that it can become a blessing in someone else's life. Blessings were never meant to stop with us. They are meant to flow through us. But what if you are the one who is hungry? Maybe you're listening to this story and you're not the person with the groceries. Maybe you're the grandmother. Maybe you're the person sitting alone. Maybe you're the one wondering where tomorrow's meal will come from. Maybe you're struggling quietly. If that's you, please remember that your circumstances do not determine your worth. Your lack does not make you less valuable. Your difficult season does not mean God has forgotten you. The Bible contains many people who went through seasons they never expected. Joseph had a pit before he had a position. David had wilderness seasons before the throne. Ruth experienced uncertainty before seeing God's provision. The disciples faced storms before seeing Jesus calm them. Your current chapter may be painful, but it doesn't have to be the final chapter. Keep trusting God. Keep praying. Keep going. And when help comes, don't be ashamed to receive it. Sometimes God blesses us through other people. And sometimes, God uses us to bless others. The question is not how much you have. Let's return to the beginning. The grandmother is still sitting outside. Her kitchen is still empty. She still doesn't know what tomorrow will bring. And Jesus is still asking, "My child, will you help her?" Maybe you don't have a lot. That's okay. Maybe you can't buy everything. That's okay. Maybe you can only do one small thing. Do it with love. Don't focus only on what you cannot do. Look at what you can do. One meal, one visit, one prayer, one conversation, one bag of groceries, one act of mercy, one moment of kindness. God can use it. Sometimes the answer is simply yes. There are moments when we overthink everything. We ask too many questions. We wonder whether we're qualified. We wonder whether we have enough. We wonder whether someone else could do it better. But sometimes God simply asks for obedience. Will you help? And the answer can be, yes, Lord. Not because you are rich. Not because you are perfect. Not because you know exactly what will happen. But because you trust God. That simple yes can open a door. That yes can bring food to a hungry person. That yes can encourage someone who feels forgotten. That yes can restore hope. That yes can become part of a story you may never fully see. Imagine what happens next. Imagine that after you leave, the grandmother prepares her meal. She sits at her table. For the first time in days, she has enough food. She looks at what you brought, and perhaps she prays. Maybe she says, "Thank you, Lord." She may not know your entire story. She may never understand why you happened to walk past her home that evening. But God knows. He knows exactly why you were there. And perhaps the blessing wasn't only that she received food. Perhaps she received hope. Perhaps she was reminded that God still sees her. And perhaps you were reminded that God can use you. That's what makes compassion so beautiful. Two lives are touched. The person receiving is blessed. And the person giving is changed. Don't wait until you have everything. You may be thinking, one day, when I have more, I'll help. But don't wait for someday. If you have something today, use it today. If you have time today, give some of it today. If you have an opportunity today, respond today. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. And the person standing in front of you today may not be there tomorrow. Sometimes the greatest opportunities disappear because we kept waiting for a better moment. God can use your life. Your life may seem ordinary. You may go to work, come home, take care of your family, pay your bills, live a simple life. But don't think ordinary means insignificant. God can use ordinary people. Your kindness can matter. Your generosity can matter. Your prayers can matter. Your example can matter. Your compassion can matter. You may never become famous. You may never stand before a crowd. But you can still make a difference. Sometimes changing one person's day is enough. Sometimes helping one person is enough. Sometimes one act of love is exactly what God wanted from you. A final look at that grandmother. So imagine her one last time. She's sitting quietly. Her hands are tired. Her home is simple. Her food is almost gone. She has no idea that someone is about to walk toward her. And then, you stop. You approach her. You smile. You ask, "Can I help you?" And maybe she looks at you with surprise. Maybe she says she doesn't want to bother you. Maybe she says, "I'm okay." But you notice that she's not. So you offer what you can. Not because you think you're better than her. Not because you're trying to impress anyone. But because you believe every person deserves compassion. And perhaps that's what Jesus wants us to learn. Don't just see people. See their needs. Don't just hear people. Listen to their hearts. Don't just feel sorry for people. Do something when you can. What kind of answer will you give Jesus? One day, we will all have moments when we look back at the opportunities we were given. People we could have encouraged. People we could have helped. People we could have forgiven. People we could have visited. People we could have fed. And perhaps the question that matters is not, did I become rich? Or did everyone know my name? But did I love the people you placed in my path? Think about that. Because Jesus taught us that love is not merely something we say. It is something we demonstrate. And sometimes the demonstration is very simple. A meal, a visit, a gift, prayer, kind word, a helping hand, a decision to stop. Your kindness may become someone's memory. Years from now, that grandmother may not remember every difficult day, but she may remember the person who showed up when she needed help. She may remember the groceries. She may remember the conversation. She may remember the smile. She may remember that someone cared. And perhaps that's the kind of legacy we should desire. Not fame, not applause, not recognition, but lives touched by love. Because kindness leaves marks on people's hearts. Sometimes the smallest act becomes a memory that lasts for years. So what will you do? The grandmother is hungry. The opportunity is in front of you. Jesus has already taught you what love looks like. So what will you do? Will you keep walking? Will you say, someone else will help her? Will you decide that her problem isn't yours? Or will you stop? Will you say, Lord, use whatever I have. Maybe you have little. Give little with love. Maybe you have much. Give generously. Maybe you have time. Give your time. Maybe all you can offer is prayer. Then pray. But don't let the fact that you cannot do everything stop you from doing something. The blessing of a willing heart. A willing heart doesn't ask, "What will I get?" It asks, "How can I help?" A willing heart doesn't wait for applause. It obeys. A willing heart doesn't need to be perfect. It simply needs to be available. And perhaps God is looking for willing hearts today. People who will notice. People who will stop. People who will care. People who will give. People who will love. People who will say, "Yes, Lord." Final message. My friend, if God has blessed you with food, remember those who are hungry. If He has blessed you with a home, remember those who have nowhere to go. If He has blessed you with family, remember those who sit alone. If He has blessed you with strength, remember those who are weak. If He has blessed you with resources, remember those who have very little. If He has blessed you with hope, share it with someone who is losing theirs. And if one day you see an elderly grandmother sitting alone, don't be too busy to notice. Don't assume someone else will help. Don't convince yourself that your little is worthless. Stop, ask, listen, and help if you can. Because you may think you're only giving someone food, but God may be giving them hope. You may think you're only spending a few minutes with someone, but God may be reminding them that they are loved. You may think you're doing one small thing, but God may use that small thing in a way you will never understand. So remember that grandmother. Remember her empty kitchen. Remember her tired face. Remember the moment Jesus looked at you and asked, "My child, will you help her?" And when that moment comes, may your answer not be, "Someone else will do it." May your answer be, "Yes, Lord. Yes, I will help. Yes, I will care. Yes, I will give what I can. Yes, I will stop. Yes, I will show compassion. Yes, I will love my neighbor. Because I know that whatever I do for someone in need, I am choosing to reflect the love of Christ." You don't have to change the entire world. Start with the person God places in front of you. Start with one meal, one visit, one prayer, one act of kindness, one willing heart, and trust God with the rest. Because sometimes, the person you think you're helping may become part of the way God changes you. Sometimes, the blessing you're praying for may begin with the blessing God is asking you to give. Sometimes, the person everyone else has forgotten is the person God is asking you to remember. And sometimes, the smallest act of love can become one of the biggest moments in someone's life. So let me ask you one final time. Would you help a hungry grandmother if Jesus asked you to? If your answer is yes, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. And remember, you may not have everything. You may not be able to help everyone. But if God gives you an opportunity to show love, don't ignore it. Use what you have. Give what you can. Love without expecting anything in return. And trust God with the results. May God give you eyes to notice people who are hurting. May He give you a heart that responds with compassion. May He give you courage when helping requires sacrifice. May He give you wisdom to know when someone needs more than words. And may your life become a source of hope to people who feel forgotten. Because the world doesn't need more people who simply see suffering and walk away. It needs people who are willing to stop. People who are willing to care. People who are willing to love. People who are willing to say, "Yes, Lord, send me." God bless you.